Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Staying, a special video podcast series produced by the Louisiana Now podcast. I am your host, Todd Rossnagel. It is great to have you along with us for another episode that we hope is helpful for those of you who are discerning the future of the United Methodist Church. It's great to have you along with us. Our special guest today, in addition to having Van Stinson, who joins us for yet another edition, as I'm so thankful that you have been doing over this entire
Always
series.
Good to be here.
It's great to see you again. Our special guest for this particular episode is one of our 4 district superintendents, the Reverend Karli Pidgeon, who is the district superintendent of the Alexandria District. Karli, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
It is great to have you. We wanted to get your insight on this process because you are a district superintendent, and one of the first steps in the process, as we've talked about, is to call your district superintendent. But before we get to all of that, so folks who may not know who you are, tell them a little bit more about your story. You're the first African-American female to be named a district superintendent in the Louisiana Conference.
I am. Yeah, which was, exciting and unexpected for myself. I, was loving what I was doing, working with Gloria in the Office of Congregational Development. And, Bishop called and said, we really need you to come to the table. And I'm like, wait, what? I've only been here like 18 months, but have now been going into my 3rd year.
Yeah. Time flies.
I know, right? And it all happened in the pandemic. Those first 2 years, the day actually that the bishop called was the day before the world shut down. So this has been a unique learning experience for me, but it's been exciting to be able to kind of walk alongside our pastors and our churches through this, as we call, unprecedented time of pandemic, social unrest, and now discernment of disaffiliation. So it's been an interesting journey, but grateful to be at the table.
Well, I'd like to ask both of you a question because you both play a role in what is happening right now. And the first question really is more of a statement, but I'd like for you to respond. Churches in the Louisiana Conference, if they're good, if everything's fine and they're wondering, do I have to do something? Like I keep hearing about, I've got to do something and hearing about churches that could potentially disaffiliate. You don't have to do anything right now, right? You don't have to call a meeting to say we're staying.
Absolutely not. That's one of the first things I say when I do come into these meetings that I'm invited into to say is, you don't have to do anything except make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Amen. That is what you have to do. Everything else, you continue to be the church. Continue to show up in your communities. Continue to serve God and serve one another. That is what we're called to do, and that's what you can continue to do. And then there are others that have further questions around that, but the baseline is you can continue being the church in which you've always been.
Van, how I want to say how troubling, but how it's not. We wish sometimes that we didn't have to go through these, but it's such a time as this. There is a season, and this is the season that we're in right now.
Well, we are, and we're all trying to live through it as faithfully as we can. And unfortunately, the anxiety that naturally comes in a season like this,
definitely,
in some ways, is being capitalized upon with widely spread misinformation. Frankly, a lot of fear-inducing rhetoric from many who have chosen to leave the United Methodist Church, but yet remain actively involved in the affairs of the United Methodist Church, which is
a problem.
Ironic, let's just put it that way,
sure,
that some of the loudest voices have chosen to leave, but yet remain engaged, which whole other conversation for a whole other day. But in some ways that has become, almost anxiety has become weaponized because it stokes the anxieties that then people become afraid and they start feeling like, oh my goodness, we have to do something, when in reality, the vast majority of churches won't have to do anything because they are good and faithful United Methodists, have been for many, many years, will be for many, many years to come. Doesn't mean they're immune from all the misinformation out there and aren't dealing with the anxiety. But as Karli said, the vast majority of churches don't have to do anything. I would say call your district superintendent.
Absolutely.
First and foremost, which I think that looks like where you're going.
Yeah, and that is part of the process, as we mentioned off the top, is to call your district superintendent or email your district superintendent. For both of you, why do you have to do that? Like, some churches may be saying to themselves, look, we can call a meeting. We mow the grass here. We pay the light bill. Why do we have to call a district superintendent to be involved in this process?
And I think the major reason is so that the information you're receiving is correct. For me, and that's what I tell all the churches that I do go in to visit, to say, I'm here to give you the information, to answer questions, to correct any information you might have received that is incorrect, and really just to let you know what the process is and to walk you through that and dispel any of the things that have been put forth that are just wrong and that are blatant lies. And so that's really the whole purpose, is to make sure that churches can make their best informed decisions based on whatever way that they go, that they have the right information to be able to make that decision.
And we'll get to some of those rumors and the disinformation in just a moment. But Van, I think there are still a lot of people, no fault of their own, who might not know how the United Methodist Church system, they are a part of a system, how that system works.
Yeah. Well,
it's a constant education.
It is.
Yes.
And, for those of us that have been a part of the system, we are constantly learning maybe just, new things about the way the system actually functions and some of the implications of some of those parts of the discipline we've been living with for years now, but have taken on a new sense of urgency and relevance. I think to Karli's point before now, the role of the district superintendent is so central in this process, and that's intentional. I mean, you look at other annual conferences, they've set up various structures in how a discernment process for local churches considering disaffiliation would be structured. Our strategic decision as an annual conference was to begin with the district superintendent, because that relationship, number one, it's personal. It's someone that you know. It's someone that shares a level of responsibility for you, for the mission and ministry of your local church, likely was very involved in the appointment of your pastor and the ongoing, supervision and conversations there. Yeah. So really we think that's the best place for that conversation around discernment to start. In an already established relationship that I think removes a lot of the delay for getting a good and healthy conversation based on facts, not rumors, not misinformation, or not other agendas, whatever they might be. So it's the best place to start. And I think so far it has served us well.
And I just want to point out to the audience at home, and this is Van's Book of Discipline. If you have to color code, this can be in a very intimidating book.
For sure.
And to not have someone on your side who can guide them through, the rules and the regulations and that which governs our system can be intimidating. And really, the district superintendent, from what I hear you saying, is there to help that process.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's been helpful for me, particularly some of our churches that, so the Alexandria district was reformed. And so I haven't gotten to all parts of the district yet. And so this has been a great way to be able to meet some, particularly some of our laity that I don't see, kind of on a regular basis at annual conferences or things like that, to be able to get in and to be able to meet with them. Because most times if I'm meeting on a Sunday, I'm worshiping with them. Yeah. And so being able to share in worship together, share communion together, to be able to say, we are the church, we are the body of Christ. Here's some information on top of that. But the true point of us being here is to worship and to be the church. So,
Karli, in one of our first episodes, I think it was the first episode with Bishop Harvey, we addressed some of the rumors, the disinformation, the misinformation that's out there. And I wanted to maybe unpack some of that. And one of the, narratives that's out there that I think is false, I hope it is false, is that
we'll see.
that this discernment process is intentionally slow, meant to slow down. What is your response to that?
Yeah, I don't think it is intentionally slow. I think it is intentional. I think that's a difference. Yeah. In that once I come in or any district superintendent comes in, gives the information, explains the process, I then turn it back over to the church, because it is then now the church's time to discern what is God speaking to us in this season. And so I actually leave most of my churches with 4 questions that I think help guide some of that discernment process for them. The first is, what would you gain by leaving the United Methodist Church? What would you lose by leaving the United Methodist Church? Do you have to be in a denomination that everybody agrees and believes exactly the same thing? And then what is God speaking to you right now? And so those are questions that we've lifted as a cabinet to say, I think this would be helpful for churches to answer those questions so that they can really say, okay, yes, we have listened to one another. We've listened to God. We've gotten all the right information. Now we can take the next step. And I think one of my colleagues also added, is this the right time? Because again, yes, there is, as we hear about that the sunset clause of 2553 of December 31st, 2023, but that's not tomorrow. There is still time to discern, to figure out, okay, God, where are you leading us for such a time as this?
Van, what is your advice to congregations who may say, we've already made up our mind, we've had this discussion, we know where we are on this issue, and you're just wasting our time?
Yeah, I mean, that certainly is a reality that
sure.
Karli and others have shared with me and with Bishop Harvey that they've discovered, in going into local churches. I think reflecting back on the pathway of where we started with all of this sometimes is helpful for me. This process began with 2553 out of the 2019 special called session of the General Conference. And initially, it was being applied very narrowly. I mean, it was specifically for churches that were in disagreement with the current disciplinary language around human sexuality. Right. What some have called the incompatibility language, that the practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. So initially, that was a very narrow lane that churches were offered the opportunity to disaffiliate. As the last few years have transpired, I'm oftentimes amazed at how much wider that lane has gotten with subsequent judicial council in decisions and interpretations of exactly what legislation was passed, so that now most any congregation, under the current way that we're interpreting the discipline, can choose to disaffiliate. Right. They can choose to become independent. They can choose to, affiliate with another denomination. And I guess from my perspective, these are incredibly significant, monumental decisions in the life of a congregation.
Absolutely.
that will alter the trajectory of their history. I mean, many of these churches that have already disaffiliated have been United Methodists going back to the 1800s. Yeah. And we've had a few things we've disagreed over since then.
Just one or two.
Right.
And we've had divisions and we've had reunifications and all that. So I guess to your question is that these are significantly impacting decisions that ought to be handled with care, prayer, and honest and open conversation. And the framework of those questions, I think, is so helpful. Unfortunately, many of the churches that you step into and encounter a leadership that says, we've already made up our mind, I wonder if those churches have actually done enough discernment, because these are not decisions that you arrive at quickly and confidently. They are decisions that you arrive at after deep discernment and with a humility that we're just trying to do our best so that we can continue to be faithful in the communities, in the context that we find ourselves. Those ought not to be hurried, definite decisions.
Yeah. Karli, what are some other pieces of misinformation that you're having to correct at the local level?
Wow, there's a lot. I think some of the initial ones I think that I have to clear up pretty early is this notion or understanding that churches are going to be forced to perform same-sex weddings in their sanctuaries. Their pastors are going to be required to do same-sex weddings.
Just to be clear,
that's not happening.
Well, the discipline has to change first in order for any of that to even take place.
Correct. So yeah, like literally the first statement I say once I'm like, welcome, thanks for inviting me here, is saying, the Book of Discipline says, as of today, that homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teachings. We are not allowed to do same-sex marriages. I was like, that is what it currently says, and it can only change at a general conference. And the next one's not till 2024.
Yeah.
And I also share, we've been fighting about it since 1972.
Right.
It's been 50 years.
And so I suspect a dovetail question to that, or a 1A or a 1B of that is that that there's this fear that they could be sued. Have you heard that?
I have heard that, yes. The one of the questions was, well, if it does change, if the Book of Discipline does change and allow churches to do same-sex marriages, if our church refuses to do one, then we'll get sued. Because other organizations or other facilities or buildings or businesses have been sued for not allowing that. And I said, and the reality is, well, you can get sued today for a variety of things. If someone trips on your carpet, you can get sued for that. But there is some protection within the United Methodist Church. If something of that nature does happen, you've got a little more coverage than if you're independent. And right now in the Book of Discipline, it gives churches and pastors the right to refuse any weddings. Male, female, gay, straight, purple, pink. It doesn't matter. We have the right now to say, I will not perform your wedding. You cannot have that wedding in this sanctuary. That's not changing.
Yeah. For both of you, I want to maybe go down the path of some scenarios that could play out. So the first scenario being a pastor who has decided that he or she will stay in the United Methodist Church, but the congregation that they are appointed to, or one of the congregations that they're appointed to, is leaving. Advice for that pastor?
Remain faithful to the call and to the appointment, because you are, even if they vote to leave today, you're still appointed to them until they are no longer United Methodist. And know that we as a cabinet are working diligently to find alternative places for you to continue to serve.
Van?
Well, and this has gotten a lot of press positively and negatively, but we do continue to have a guaranteed appointment system for elders in full connection. So if you're an elder in full connection in the Louisiana Conference, you're guaranteed an appointment. How that plays out, what that looks like, after a church disaffiliates, in some ways we're in uncharted territory with some of this, and various scenarios are being looked at that currently, are under consideration. Bottom line is, be faithful, just like Karli said, and know that, the United Methodist Church into which you were ordained and entered into a covenant that you gave your life to go where you are sent and to serve where you are appointed. The other side of that covenant is you will have an appointment, and folks have your back in this, if I can just put it bluntly.
Absolutely.
Because some of these we're seeing are younger clergy.
Yes.
They're in some of their early appointments, and we certainly want to do everything we can to make sure that we handle that with the utmost care, because the last thing we would want to have as an unintended consequence of a church choosing to disaffiliate is losing a young pastor that has a lot of years ahead to serve, simply because by no choice or fault of their own.
And if a congregation were to enter into the discernment process and decide that the congregation wants to stay, but the pastor has decided that he or she wants to leave the United Methodist Church, your advice to a congregation, what would that be?
Remain faithful.
And we will do our best to
our
have
best.
someone appointed
Absolutely.
to that church.
You know,
Right.
but because I do think there will be some realignments that
Sure.
will have to happen because we've got pastors that will no longer have pulpits and then pulpits that are empty. So how do we best match up some of those gifts with the needs of the churches?
And, Todd, if I might interject here too, Karli, what I'm seeing from my vantage point is that more times than not, in many of these congregational settings, to your point, it's the pastors who are oftentimes raising the issue of disaffiliation, even more so than the congregations. That's not a hard and fast rule,
right. In some places,
but in many places, congregations are asking, well, why do we need to even consider this?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they shouldn't consider it, but it certainly does illustrate how in many ways, in most cases, this is often a clergy-led conversation. And that can be good, or it cannot be good, depending upon how that is handled. And
I find it, I guess, refreshing that the advice is to stay faithful. And that word faithful is encouraging to me because we have to have faith in the midst of all of this, no matter where we are, no matter what our current situation is. So I've been asking all of our guests where they see hope. So Karli, where do you see hope in the middle of this process when you arrive at one of those small churches that says, we've made up our mind, we're leaving, and you drive to the next church on some of those backcountry roads? Where do you see hope?
Yeah, I see hope even in the churches, even in the ones that are discerning, which way to go one way or another. Particularly if I've worshiped with them, to hear about the back to school drives that they're doing, or the Sunday schools that are beginning again, that were not there prior to because of COVID. That's where I see hope. Or even just to see at a church recently, two little acolytes go and light the I don't see that often any longer. So to see them in their white little robe with the candle walking down, that's where I see hope, because those babies are going to need a church, and they're going to need to know about the loving saving grace of Jesus now and into their future. So for me, there's still hope in the midst of all of this turmoil, that God is still calling people, God is still inviting people into a right relationship with Him. So,
and to pick up on that acolyte image that you painted, Van, those acolytes, the call is to bring the light of Christ out into the world, and that still continues. And I will say this, it still continues even in the churches that have chosen to disaffiliate. Sure. That is our call as Christian witness, to bring the light of Christ to a hurting world.
Well said. And, a sign of hope for me, ironically, is when we gather for cabinet meetings, and Karli and her three colleagues, the other three district superintendents, come in and share how many of these conversations have gone with churches. Some churches, it's pretty clear that they are on a path to disaffiliate, and yet they're healthy, mission-driven, future-oriented conversations that are done with respect and honoring the system and honoring the choice that a church makes. And then there are other instances where a church is in the middle of a conversation. They're like, I don't really think we need to be having this conversation right now. So it kind of runs the gamut, but I see hope in the system. The system works.
Yes.
And we oftentimes say, trust the system and work the system as it is designed to work, and it will lead us through. And there are signs of how that is serving, despite the rumors and misinformation to the contrary, that I think is not helpful at all. We have a system that has served us well. It will serve us through this season if we remain faithful to it and honor it. So,
Karli, thank you for taking time out of.
Sure.
I say this always about our guests, taking time out of your busy schedule to visit with us, and I know that your schedule is busy. So thank you for driving down here to Baton Rouge and having this conversation with us.
Sure thing. Glad to be here.
And best of luck out there with many of these conversations.
Yes, and I think kind of what's Van has said, that I think it has been helpful for me to be able to go in and have conversations and be surprised by some of the responses. And that, in my mind, I'm sure I've had an idea like, oh, I know I'm going in, they've already made up their mind, I'm just giving the information and then getting on out of there. But then being able to kind of have conversations and have even one person say, well, wait a second. I thought it was this. So it's not that? And to be able to kind of see light bulbs go off for folks, or some clarity gained to say, well, why are we doing this? Why are we having these conversations? Let's wait a second. And so that for me is exciting to say, even if one person is saying, well, wait a second, I have further questions, that helps me know that we're doing the right thing.
Yeah. Well, thanks again.
Thank you.
And for those of you at home who might have questions about the disaffiliation process, we're here to answer those questions. You can get in touch with us a variety of different ways in the show notes or in the link that you found on YouTube to watch this video series. We're here to answer your questions, and we're here to help you as best we can. So on behalf of Van, William Willoughby, who is producing, Karli Pidgeon, our guest today, this has been another episode of Staying, a Louisiana Now production. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Until next time, have a great day.